Welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews in partnership with Reebok Nano Sports, and today we're taking a look at the Reebok Nano X3. It's a cross-training shoe, and we're also going to compare it to the Nano X2 to see what changed. Let's run with it. Now before we get started, I do want to say these shoes were provided to me by Reebok Nano Sports. However, no one had a chance to preview this video, and the file synopsis is my own. I'd also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. Now today we're taking a look at the Reebok Nano X3. This is a cross-training shoe designed for fitness classes, weightlifting, gym use, CrossFit, you name it. It's just kind of your general purpose gym shoe. Now, what separates this from a running shoe is it has a few more structural elements. The midsole is going to be much more firm, and you have some plastic pieces built into the shoe itself to give you support when you need it, especially when you're dealing with explosive movements or heavy weights. So I always recommend using a training shoe when going to the gym and staying away from your actual running shoe, since if you lift or just go to the gym in your running shoes, it decreases the life of the midsole and kind of shortens their life. So I always do recommend having some kind of dedicated gym shoe. That way you kind of prevent injury. You're not lifting on this soft, squishy midsole, and you'll have something that's a little bit more supportive, and that's where the Reebok Nano X3 comes in. We also have the X2. I've had this for a little over a year, quite liked it, so it's been interesting to try the X3, and I'll get into some of the differences, since it feels like a Nano, but there are some small tweaks that I think are important to note. As far as stats go, the X3 cost $150 and did gain about a full ounce in the weight department, and now weighs 12.4 ounces. As far as the stack height goes, I believe it's the same as last year, 19.5 in the heel and 12.5 in the forefoot for that same 7mm drop. So we do gain a little bit of weight, but we do have some more structural elements to the shoe itself. Moving on to the upper, this is where a lot of the changes took place. On the X2, we had this knit-like material with all these designs implemented into the upper itself. That was simplified this year. On the X3, we have the flex weave material. It's a very consistent pattern. They did print on the Reebok branding on the lateral and medial side. Now, as far as how your foot feels with this new flex weave material, you actually don't feel the flex weave on the outside because there's an internal sock liner. It's very soft, very comfortable. We kind of saw the same thing on the X2. It just is kind of interesting. You look at the upper and you think that's what your foot interacts with, and that's not the case because of that internal liner. Again, very comfortable. I think it works well, but it does make both of these shoes extremely warm when it comes to breathability. Now, neither of them are breathable, but I will say the X2 feels slightly more breathable compared to the X3, and I think that's because the toe box section has kind of a knit-like pattern where it gives you a little bit more ventilation. Again, it's not that well ventilated, but it's slightly more ventilated, just has a little bit more breathability compared to what we see on the X3. Reebok also updated the fit of the Nano X3. It's noticeably more snug, and the toe box is brought in just a bit as well. You can actually see this if you line up both shoes and kind of compare the forefoot sections. You'll see that the X2, it has just maybe a few more millimeters of width to the forefoot. I'll also say that the toe box section has a little bit more volume just because of how the upper was constructed and that additional width. I actually like this. It let my toes kind of splay out. Some people said the X2 was a half size large. I necessarily agree with that. I thought the length was fine. It's just a slightly wider toe box. Now, it kind of depends on your personal preference. Personally, for me, I like the wider toe box. Lets my toes splay out, gives me some additional stability. Not that the stability on the X3 was bad. I thought they were pretty comparable on the platform, but it is a noticeably more snug experience. Now, when it comes to lockdown, I think the X3 has the advantage there just because it's a more narrow shoe, and they did update the heel counter to give you a little bit more support. There's a bit more padding back there as well. So again, it comes down to your personal preference. You have a little bit more volume to the upper on the X2, while the X3 does get a little bit more snug. So again, it depends on what you're looking for, what kind of activities you are doing, and I would just kind of keep that in mind when looking at these two options. The tongue on the X3 has also been updated slightly, and I'm happy to see that they did update it, mainly because the tongue on the X2 had some irritating edges. Basically, it was some flimsy edges of the tongue, so they would fold under themselves and create these irritation points that would cause some discomfort. Now, you could flatten them out and get everything situated correctly, but it was kind of a pain to do that every so often. That's fixed here on the 3. The 3 has about the same level of thickness. However, the edges of the tongue are a little bit more sturdy and don't fold under and kind of create a more consistent feel. Both tongues are ungusseted, so you just kind of have a free floating tongue. However, on the X3, they have two tongue to lace interaction points, if that makes sense. Basically, the tongue interacts with the laces in two separate points, while it only does it one here on the X2. It's fine. I don't know if you necessarily need the extra lace interaction point. I thought it was, the lacing system was fine here on the X2, and I think it kind of holds true here on the X3. Moving to the back of the shoe, this is where things start to get interesting. On the X3, you have a bit more padding in the ankle and Achilles area. I found this to be quite pleasant. However, the largest change is the heel counter itself. Basically, you have this larger, more substantial plastic clip that becomes part of the heel counter, then extends through the midfoot on both the lateral and medial side. Basically, this stiffens up the middle part of the shoe, makes it more supportive for those dynamic movements or explosive movements, and allows you to lift as well with a lot more support compared to a conventional shoe or running shoe for that matter. Now on the X2, it was a little bit more low profile, gave you a plenty of support. Again, I was really happy with the X2. I really did love this shoe, but the heel counter wasn't as well supported like we see here on the Nano X3, and it does feel noticeable when you put your foot into the shoe. It feels like you just have a more secure feeling just because you do have quite a bit more plastic surrounding the back part of your foot, and part of the reason I think of why this shoe does weigh almost a full ounce heavier compared to its predecessor. Now this new support system, the updated plastic and everything, is called the Lift and Run chassis system, which according to Reebok makes the shoe a little bit more dynamic. It's actually quite interesting because there's some components you can't actually see upon first look. Yes, you have more plastic around the heel area and midfoot. However, the plastic actually extends down through the forefoot, stiffening up the forefoot quite a bit compared to its predecessor. There's also this kind of foam unit in the heel that's supposed to compress and kind of interact with the plastic to lock down the shoe, give you that secure lifting experience. And then when you're running or doing those other movements, it's supposed to have that kind of cushiony, bouncy sensation. Now, I tried both of these shoes on both of my feet. There is a slight difference here in the X3. It does feel more, I guess, stiff, mainly because the plastic system gives you more support. And I will say the X3 feels more supportive, especially through the back part of the shoe, and has a better lockdown because it's a little bit more narrow. And also feels more stiff because that plastic plate comes through the forefoot and does stiffen things up quite a bit, while the X2 has a little bit more toe spring. Basically, the midsole felt a bit more curved, and the forefoot is noticeably more flexible, mainly because there's no plastic towards that front toe box region, while the X3 does have, you can kind of see it here on both the lateral side and then on the outsole. You kind of see where the plastic kind of extends all the way up to where the Reebok branding is. So the X3 is supposed to be a little bit more dynamic. Personally, I liked it a little bit less for running compared to the X2, but for lifting, explosive movements, and things where I had to put a lot of energy through my shoe, or if I was carrying some weight, I appreciated the X3 a bit more. I think this will come down to your personal preference. Again, whether you want the wider toe box, the more flexible experience, and a little bit more toe spring, or if you want a little bit of a stiffer shoe, a more snug experience, and a little bit more support that is also a little bit heavier. It's just overall package. So it's just something to keep in mind when comparing these two. Again, I really like the X2 and I still like the X2, but I think the X3 comes in, I think, in a slightly better rating when it comes to lifting heavy weights or doing truly explosive movements. Moving on to the midsole, we still have Float Ride Energy Foam. Now, if you're not familiar, this is a rather firm midsole, especially if you're coming from like a running shoe or walking shoe. And this is good mainly because you want that stable base to lift on. Yet, I think Float Ride does a good job of giving you a nice level of shock absorption and impact protection if you're running or just training for long periods of time. Now, in my experience, these midsoles felt quite comparable. The stack heights, I believe, are pretty much the same. They both have that same 7mm drop. The only small difference, like I mentioned before, with the Lift and Run chassis system is you have that extra bit of cushioning in the heel unit, which is slightly noticeable. But overall, it feels very much like a Reebok Nano. I feel like I was able to move weight in it. If you're a power lifter, just use a powerlifting shoe. I think these may be a little bit too soft for you, but I think for most people, especially those doing CrossFit or other just wide variety of lifts, or someone just wants a good gym shoe, I think this midsole works quite well and is very comfortable. Moving on to the outsole, we have a massive change here. Basically, the X3 is a very smooth outsole pattern, while the X2 has all these small individual rubber lugs. Now, which one is better? Well, it really does depend on what you're doing and where you're doing it. The X3 has more ground contact and a little bit better grip when it comes to conventional surfaces like asphalt, brick, concrete, rubber mats, you name it, while the X2 has better grip on like turf, dirt, gravel, things like that, where you need a little bit more texture on the outsole. Kind of think car tires. This is kind of like a race car tire, and this is like a more conventional car tire. So I think both work well. It just depends where you need the grip or where you're performing your activities. I think for most people who are just doing it in the gym, the Nano X3 will work a little better just because you have more ground contact and it'll grip the ground just a bit better. One other small thing to note about the outsole is the toe guard. Basically, you have a bit more rubber on the X2 and does have those lugs as well. I did find the rubber on the toe section to be a little bit better compared to the X3, which just is a little bit smooth and slightly smaller compared to the X2. We also have to talk about the Ropepro sections. Basically, it's this small area on the medial side and lateral side, which is supposed to give you a little bit more grip if you do rope climbs. Personally, I don't, but after reading some of the reviews on the X2, I noticed that some people said it was breaking off because it has this like lip of rubber. So I'll say that the X3 will probably be a little bit more durable, mainly because there's no rubber lip. It's just all kind of integrated directly into the outsole / midsole itself. So where does that leave us? Well, I think both shoes are great. There are some key differences, the biggest being the fit and feel of the upper. The X2 has a bit more room to it. A wider toe box gives you a little bit more toe splay, and again, it's a little bit more accommodating through the upper itself. The X3, a little bit more narrow toe box, but I did find the lockdown to be better, partly because, yes, it's a more narrow shoe, but I think the heel counter is superior because of that lift and run chassis system and the extra support you get through the back half of the shoe. The midsole, it feels about the same. You do get a little bit more cushioning in the heel with that additional unit back there. And then I think the midsole is a little bit stiffer just because that lift and run chassis system runs a little bit closer to the forefoot, and that does not exist here on the X2, which also does have a bit more toe spring as well. The X3 is about a full ounce heavier, so if you're wearing it all day, that could be another factor to consider. And I think the X2 has slightly better breathability. But either way, I think they are quite good, and just kind of comes down to what you're looking for and your foot shape. And then the last thing, like we just talked about, is the outsole. I think the outsole on the X3 works better for those conventional surfaces, where if you're someone who goes outside inside, I think the X2 might work a bit better. Well, I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.